My name is Cassandra, and for 32 years, I lived in the shadow of my older sister, Melanie. To the world, we were the perfect family. A picturesque home in suburban Boston, smiling Christmas cards, proud parents with two beautiful daughters. But inside those walls, I was invisible. No matter how hard I worked, no matter how high I climbed, I was always the lesser one. My achievements were footnotes, my struggles were dismissed. And Melanie, she was the sun we all revolved around. But what my family didn't know was that, while they were busy doting on her mediocrity, I was quietly building an empire, a $15 million empire. And everything changed last Thanksgiving. When I finally stopped hiding, I can still remember being 6 years old, flipping through our family photo albums. Each thick page was brimming with Melanie, her first smile, her first steps, her birthday parties with color-coded decorations and page-long captions. Then, at the very back, a blurry picture of me at age 3, holding a crayon. Cassandra likes to draw, it said underneath. That single sentence captured my childhood perfectly. Sparse, detached, barely acknowledged. Melanie was the golden child. She got ballet classes and front-row parents at every recital. I won the state science fair at 12. My parents didn't come. They were at one of Melanie's competitions. I still have the certificate tucked in a box under my bed. They said they were proud, but they forgot to frame it. Christmases were cruel lessons in favoritism. I unwrapped socks and encyclopedias while Melanie got sapphire necklaces and concert tickets. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was tougher, but it did matter. Every little slight became a scar I carried through adolescence and into adulthood. Discipline in our house was another reminder of my place. When Melanie broke curfew, it was a gentle talk over tea. When I did the same, it was a month without TV and a list of chores that grew by the day. I became independent out of necessity. By age 13, I was cooking my own meals, managing my own schedule, learning to live in the shadows. I stopped looking for their approval. I started planning my escape. The only person who truly saw me was Grandma Evelyn, my father's mother, sharp as a tack, no nonsense, and never impressed by theatrics. Every Sunday afternoon, she'd call me to her kitchen table, pour us both tea, and ask about school. She asked real questions, the kind that said, "I see you. I care." When I was 15, she changed my life. "Do you know what compound interest is?" she asked as we pulled cookies from the oven. I shook my head. She smiled and said, "Let me show you how money grows." Over the next few years, she taught me everything: how to save, how to invest, how to think long-term. My parents never taught us about money. They taught Melanie how to charm a room and me how to clean one. But Grandma Evelyn gave me a gift more valuable than anything they ever wrapped: knowledge. I graduated high school as valedictorian, earned a full ride to a top state university, and gave a speech that made my professors cry. My parents, they spent the after-party bragging about Melanie's acceptance to a third-tier private college. "It's so expensive," my dad said, beaming. "But she deserves the best." I stood there, diploma in hand, wondering what I had to do to matter. I stopped wondering and started building. While Melanie drifted through majors and gap years, I triple majored in finance, economics, and data science. I worked 3 jobs, barely slept, and still graduated summa cum laude. My parents came to the ceremony but left before dinner. They had to drive Melanie to a weekend retreat. I never asked for much, but that night, I promised myself one thing. One day, I would build a life so grand they couldn't ignore me if they tried. And I did. At 22, I got my first job at Blackridge Capital. Analyst. Entry level. Underpaid. I took it anyway. I lived in a shoebox apartment with 3 roommates and invested half of every paycheck. I read market trends the way other people read gossip columns. I didn't sleep much, but I studied. I watched. I waited. I outperformed everyone on my floor in under a year. Grandma Evelyn died during my junior year. Her death gutted me. My parents cried at the funeral, but I knew they were crying for the idea of her, not the woman. A month later, her lawyer called. She'd left me everything, $50,000. My dad asked me to split it with Melanie. "She wants to go to grad school," he said. "Family supports family." For the first time in my life, I said no. I didn't even raise my voice. I just said, "This is mine." I used that money to start something of my own. TWC Capital Strategies. I worked insane hours. I studied every mistake my managers had made. And slowly, I built a portfolio that grew and grew. I focused on undervalued tech, female-led startups, renewable energy. I took risks others were too afraid to take. By 27, I was worth over $1 million. By 32, 15 times that. And still, at every Thanksgiving, my family asked me if I was seeing anyone, if I was still doing finance stuff, if I'd thought about moving home. Last year, something in me snapped. The decision to bring Marcus home for Thanksgiving wasn't impulsive. He had been in my life for almost a year. A brilliant architect with calm eyes and a laugh that made the world feel lighter. He knew everything, the childhood I rarely spoke of, the fortune I never flaunted, the identity I buried beneath a fabricated narrative of modesty and emotional self-preservation. One evening, as I gave my usual vague response to my mother's question about work, Marcus looked at me and asked, "Why do you keep hiding?" I didn't know how to answer him. Not really. Because the truth was shameful and complicated and deeply rooted in years of being treated like an afterthought. I told myself I didn't need their approval, but deep down, part of me still craved it. Or maybe I just wanted them to see what they had missed, what they had dismissed. So that year, I stopped hiding. I wore the clothes I liked, not flashy, but real, elegant, confident. I didn't show up in a rental car. I drove the Tesla I owned. I brought a new flat-screen TV for my parents. Not extravagant, but more generous than anything I had ever gifted them before. And I brought Marcus, a quiet rebellion wrapped in kindness. The moment we walked through the door, the air shifted. My mother rushed past me to greet Marcus. My father gave me a distracted nod. Then came Melanie, sweeping in like she always did. Perfectly polished, perfectly composed. "Cassandra," she said, offering a cheek, then turned to Marcus with a wide, approving smile. "So you're the famous architect. Mom talks about you all the time." Dinner was predictable. Melanie's promotion to senior marketing manager was the main event. My mother clapped her hands and served her favorite dish, Swedish meatballs that she hadn't made in years. My achievements remained unspoken. I sat through it all in silence, watching how effortlessly the attention flowed in one direction. Then, Marcus let it slip. "We're heading to Tokyo next month," he said casually. "Passing the gravy. Cass has a client there. But we're going to stay a few extra days and explore the city." Melanie's eyes locked onto me, and I knew she was calculating. Her smile thinned. "A client in Tokyo?" she asked. "Sounds intense for a data analyst." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The wheels were already turning in her mind. I caught her later, out on the back porch, phone in hand, typing furiously. She didn't even try to hide it. I saw her eyes widen, her jaw slacken. She looked up slowly. "You lied," she said, voice low and shaking. "You've been lying to us this whole time." I didn't argue. I walked past her and went back inside, heart pounding. I had always feared this moment, but as I sat at the table again, watching my father carve the turkey, something shifted inside me. I didn't feel afraid anymore. I felt done. The bomb dropped after dessert. I handed my parents the wrapped television, quietly explaining it was an early gift. My mother frowned. "Cassandra, this must have cost," Melanie cut in. $1,500, she said, waving her phone. I looked it up. "Cassandra, what the hell? Since when can you afford this?" I tried to stay calm. "I've done well." "Well," she snapped, "you've got a company worth millions. You've been in Forbes. You've got employees and investments and God knows what else. And you let us think you were barely scraping by?" My father froze. My mother covered her mouth. Melanie's voice climbed higher. "We struggled to make mortgage payments. I had to ask Mom and Dad for help with our car loan. And you were just sitting on a fortune." I looked at her, at all of them, and for once, I didn't shrink. "I do well," I said again, slower this time, "because I built something. I built it without help, without encouragement, without anyone ever asking me what I needed. And now, suddenly, it matters, because you think it benefits you." Melanie stood, trembling with indignation. "You're selfish." I rose to my feet, my voice steady. "Selfish? You got every ounce of attention, every dollar of support, every word of praise. I got expectations and silence. And now that I have something of my own, you expect to pay out?" My mother whispered. "We didn't know." "No," I said. "You didn't ask." The table was silent, forks frozen in midair, wine glasses half full. And I looked around one last time at the family who had never truly seen me, realizing I no longer needed them to. "Marcus and I are leaving," I said. "You're just walking out?" Melanie asked, voice cracking. After dropping this, I nodded. "Exactly." We didn't speak as we gathered our coats. My father remained seated, eyes vacant. My mother's lips trembled as if she wanted to say something but didn't know how. Melanie just stood there, fists clenched at her sides, the weight of her own entitlement hanging like smoke in the room. Marcus held the door open for me, and the moment I stepped into the cold November air, I felt lighter, like something had been carved out of me that had been rotting for years. We drove to the Marriott in silence, the tension only breaking when we reached our room, and I collapsed onto the bed in a fit of laughter and disbelief. "I can't believe that just happened," I said, breathless. "I've never seen my father speechless." Marcus smiled, brushing a hand over my hair. "You were brilliant, poised. They didn't even know what hit them." I wish that were entirely true. Part of me was still reeling, still 12 years old, still holding a certificate no one had framed. I hadn't planned to expose everything, but once Melanie forced the issue, I couldn't put the mask back on, and maybe I didn't want to anymore. That night, my phone didn't stop buzzing. Texts, voicemails, calls, Melanie, alternating between furious outbursts and guilt-laced demands. My mother, tearful, begging me to come back, to talk, to fix things. Even Brad, Melanie's husband, sent an awkward message apologizing for the chaos. My father, as expected, said nothing. I silenced my phone and set it on the nightstand. "Face down. They'll have to wait," I said, pulling the covers over me. "I'm exhausted." Marcus reached for the room service menu. "You want wine or ice cream?" "Both," I said, and we spent the rest of the evening wrapped in blankets, watching terrible TV, pretending the world outside didn't exist. The next morning, I was still in the shower when Marcus answered a knock at the door. I came out wrapped in a robe, hair dripping, to find my father standing awkwardly in the doorway. He looked like he hadn't slept. Yesterday's clothes, unshaven, pale. He held a coffee in one hand, and the weight of 30 years in the other. "I need to speak to my daughter," he said. Marcus excused himself with quiet grace, slipping out to the lobby, and I invited my father in. He sat in the desk chair, staring at the carpet for nearly a full minute before speaking. 15 million, he muttered, almost to himself. "I can't even wrap my head around that." I stayed silent. "It's not about the money, is it?" I met his eyes. "No, it never was." He nodded slowly, a man dismantling his own illusions brick by brick. "I wasn't a good father to you. I thought I was, but I wasn't. I gave everything to the child who demanded it, and forgot the one who didn't. That almost broke me. The honesty, the admission. I hadn't expected it. Not from him. When you were 10, he continued, you built that rotating solar system model. I remember it. Your teacher said it was the most advanced she'd seen from a student that age. We were supposed to stay for the awards, but your sister got bored. Threw a tantrum in the parking lot. We left early. I remember," I said. "They called my name and I stood up alone." He rubbed his face like he was trying to erase something. "I've thought about that moment for years. I don't even know what we were thinking. I told myself you didn't need us, that you were strong, independent. I was because I had to be," I replied. He didn't argue. He just nodded, swallowing hard. "We failed you." I wanted to cry. I wanted to scream. I wanted to say, "Yes, you did." But instead, I simply asked, would this conversation be happening if I didn't have money? That question hung in the air like fog. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. After a pause, his phone rang. He glanced at it, hesitated, then answered in a hushed voice. I heard my mother's frantic tone through the speaker. "They want to talk," he said after hanging up. "Your mother, Melanie, all of us. As a family, about my money," I said flatly. He didn't deny it. When Marcus returned, I told him everything. He sat beside me, his hand resting over mine. "You don't owe them anything, Cass," he said. "You don't even owe them your presence." But I needed closure. I needed to finish what had begun at that table. We went back. My mother met us at the door with red eyes and trembling hands. Melanie stood behind her, stony and defensive. We sat in the living room like strangers circling an old battlefield. My mother tried first. "We love you, Cassandra. We always have." "No," I said. "You loved Melanie out loud. You loved me in quiet assumptions." Melanie rolled her eyes. "This isn't about the past anymore. We're adults. The question is, are you going to help your family or not?" I stared at her. This woman who had always had everything and still thought she deserved more. "What have you ever done for me, Melanie?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again. That's what I thought. She didn't like the silence. Melanie never did. She thrived on noise, on attention, approval, drama, anything that filled the space where self-awareness might have lived. Her jaw clenched as she searched for a response that wouldn't make her look worse than she already did. My mother reached for my hand, but I gently pulled it away. "I'm not here to be manipulated," I said. "I came to be clear." Melanie snapped. "You're twisting everything. You're acting like a victim when all this time you were sitting on millions, letting us believe you were barely making it. And for what? Some big reveal to make us feel small." I looked at her, at the woman who had always gotten first pick, first praise, first love. "No," I said softly. "I hid it because I didn't trust you. I still don't." She laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and hollow. "God, you're so dramatic." Marcus stood quietly in the doorway, watching, waiting, knowing I could fight my own battles but ready if I needed him. I met Melanie's eyes and said the one thing I had waited my entire life to say. "You don't get to define me anymore." Her face twisted. "Is that why you came back here?" "To gloat. To finally get the applause you didn't get as a kid." I leaned forward. "No, I came back to draw a line. Not for applause. For peace. My peace." My mother whispered. "We just want things to go back to the way they were." "They never were good," I said. "You just didn't notice." The room fell quiet again. My father sat on the edge of the couch, looking like he wanted to vanish into the cushions. I turned to him. "You've said you failed me." "That's a start. But this moment, it's about what comes next. Because I'm not going to keep performing gratitude for scraps of affection. I'm not going to keep pretending I wasn't abandoned emotionally so my sister could be center stage." My mother's lips quivered. "We were doing our best." "No," I replied. "You were doing what was easy." Melanie threw her hands up. "So what? You're cutting us all off now. You think money makes you better than us?" I stood. "No, but it gave me options. And I'm choosing not to keep handing myself over to people who only care now that they know I'm valuable." "That's not fair," my mother said. "It's the truth." Melanie's voice cracked. "You could at least help us. A down payment on a house. Something for Mom and Dad's retirement. You have $15 million. Cassandra, don't you think some of that should go to your family?" I turned toward the window, staring at the cold light outside. "The same family that forgot my birthday. That skipped my college awards because you had a stomach ache. That praised your mediocrity while calling my ambition boring." My father shifted uncomfortably. "We made mistakes." I nodded. "Yes. And here's what happens next. I'm not giving Melanie a dime. I'm not responsible for the life she can't afford. If you're in real trouble, health, housing, I will help. But not because I owe you, because I choose to." Melanie's expression crumbled. "You're selfish." "No," Marcus said suddenly. "She's just tired of being your bank account in waiting. You want Cassandra to fix 30 years of imbalance with a check. But she doesn't owe you that. She built her life from the ground up while you got to coast." Melanie glared at him. "Stay out of it." "But I stepped in between them." "No. He sees what you refuse to see. That I've already given everything I had to this family. My silence, my patience, my grief. Now, I'm giving myself permission to stop." The air felt heavy, raw. My mother wiped tears from her cheeks, but didn't speak. My father opened his mouth and closed it again. Melanie crossed her arms, trying to reclaim power she no longer had. "I'm leaving," I said. "And this time, I'm not coming back just to play the quiet role. If you want me in your lives, it has to be real, respectful, equal." No one followed me to the door. In the car, Marcus didn't speak until we were halfway to the highway. "You okay?" I looked out at the frost lining the bare trees. "Not really, but I'm free." He reached over, took my hand. "That's enough for now." The drive back to New York was long and quiet, but it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that comes after a storm has passed and the air is finally breathable again. I watched the winter landscape blur past the window, the bare trees like skeletons reaching for something they could never grasp. For the first time in my life, I wasn't wondering what they were thinking, whether I'd said too much or not enough. I didn't owe them anything. Not explanations, not justifications, and certainly not access to the life I had built without their help. Marcus squeezed my hand lightly. "You were incredible." I gave him a tired smile. "I was terrified, but it felt right." He nodded. "It was right." When we got home, I turned off my phone for the rest of the weekend. I needed space, not just from them, but from the version of myself I had been for so long. Quiet, agreeable, invisible. That version didn't belong in my life anymore. But my family didn't disappear. On Monday morning, I opened my email to find a message from my cousin Stephanie, someone I hadn't spoken to in over 5 years. Her tone was syrupy, fake concern dripping from every word. She had heard through the grapevine that I was doing well for myself and wondered if I'd consider helping her son attend soccer camp. Attached was a GoFundMe link. I didn't reply. That afternoon, I received 3 more messages from extended relatives, none of whom had ever reached out to congratulate me on my degrees, or my company, or even my birthday. But now that the word millionaire had been whispered into the family ether, I was suddenly relevant. I started blocking numbers, and I started therapy. Dr. Elizabeth Harrison came highly recommended for adults dealing with family trauma. In our first session, she listened as I unraveled years of neglect, favoritism, and manufactured family roles. "It sounds like your family assigned you the role of the self-sufficient one," she said, which often translates to invisible. "You were valued for your reliability, not your emotions. Your needs weren't neglected maliciously, but they were neglected all the same." I nodded, tears burning at the edges of my eyes. I spent 30 years trying to earn love, and when I stopped trying, they called me selfish. "They weren't used to you having boundaries," she said. "That doesn't make you selfish. That makes you whole." The sessions helped more than I expected. I learned to recognize the patterns, to stop blaming myself for things I never controlled, and to accept that healing didn't mean reconciliation. It meant release. 6 weeks after Thanksgiving, I sent a message to my parents. Not a plea, not an invitation, just clarity. I told them I was done discussing my finances, that my money was not a family asset, and it would not be used to fund lifestyles built on expectation rather than effort. I told them I would only attend future gatherings where I was treated with equal respect, not forced politeness, but real consideration. Melanie never replied. My father called 3 days later and left a voicemail that said, "I read your message. I understand, and I want to do better." He sounded sincere, tired, but sincere. My mother's reaction was more complicated. She sent long, winding emails, peppered with nostalgia and half-hearted apologies. She still mentioned Melanie constantly, still tried to bridge the gap with guilt instead of accountability. I didn't respond to every message. I learned to let silence speak for me when needed. But the most defining moment came when I made a decision that surprised even myself. I created an educational trust fund for Melanie's children. My niece and nephew, it would cover their college tuition when the time came. But with a caveat, the funds could not be accessed for any other purpose. Not by Melanie. Not by anyone. When I told my parents, my mother cried. "That's so generous," she whispered, "especially after everything." "I did it for them," I said, "not for her. They shouldn't be punished for the way she treats people." My father added, quietly, "That's more than fair." As the seasons changed, so did my life. My relationship with Marcus grew deeper. He had stood by me through the worst of it, never speaking over me, never trying to fix what needed to be felt. He simply held space for my truth. And in a world where I'd spent years fighting to be seen, that meant everything. 6 months after Thanksgiving, he proposed. We were on a weekend trip in the Berkshires, walking through a quiet trail flanked by blooming wildflowers. He knelt in the soft grass and opened a box with a vintage emerald ring, green like resilience, quiet like power. "Yes," I whispered, before he could even finish the question. That night, as we lay beneath the stars, he asked, "Do you think you'd want kids one day?" I thought about it for a long moment. Then I nodded. "Yes, but we'll do it differently. We'll love them for who they are, not for who needs us most." And I meant it. The months that followed were filled with quiet transformation. Planning a wedding wasn't something I had ever envisioned with excitement, especially not with a family like mine. But Marcus made it feel like we were designing our own private future. Not a performance. We kept it intimate. No elaborate seating charts. No bloated guest list filled with relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Just people who saw me, truly saw me, and celebrated who I had become. Melanie wasn't invited. My mother tried. Of course, she called a week after we sent out save the dates, her voice laced with sugar and anxiety. "Maybe this is the moment for healing," she suggested. "Invite your sister. Let the past go." I didn't hesitate. The past didn't go anywhere. And I'm not putting myself in a room with someone who only wants access to my life when it benefits her. There was a pause. And then the inevitable sigh. "Family should be together for things like this." "No," I said gently but firmly. "Family should be safe, supportive. If being in the same room with her would ruin my day, that tells you everything." She didn't argue, not directly. But I could feel her disappointment hanging between us like smoke. I didn't let it in. The wedding was perfect. A coastal venue in Maine, surrounded by tall pines and gentle waves. I wore a dress that felt like armor and light at once. Marcus looked at me like I was the only person in the world. When I walked down the aisle, it wasn't just toward a man I loved. It was away from everything that had held me back. I didn't carry any invisible weight that day. Just peace. Grandma Evelyn would have loved it. There were moments, of course, when grief still found its way in. During the father-daughter dance, I caught a glimpse of my dad at his table. He looked proud, maybe for the first time without reservation. When we spoke later that evening, he hugged me longer than usual and whispered, "I missed so much," I whispered back. "But you're here now," he nodded, and for once, didn't try to fix what had passed. He just held on. Over time, my relationship with my parents settled into something more honest, if still fragile. We didn't talk every week, and when we did, we avoided old triggers, but they began asking real questions about my business, my ideas, the organizations I mentored. It wasn't perfect. Sometimes I still sensed the instinct to revert, to center Melanie in the conversation, but I was quicker now to redirect or end the call. My boundaries had become muscle memory. Melanie, on the other hand, remained a shadow. After my refusal to give her money, she launched her own campaign, telling relatives that I was arrogant, greedy, even cruel. She framed herself as the wounded sister abandoned by success. Some people believed her, others didn't. But I had stopped caring about how I was interpreted by those who never took the time to know me. One night, I received a message from an old high school friend. We hadn't spoken in over a decade, but she'd seen a recent article about TWC Capital and reached out just to say how proud she was. She wrote, "You always had this quiet brilliance. I'm glad the world finally noticed." I read the message 3 times, tears stinging my eyes, not because I needed the praise, but because it reminded me that the people who matter are the ones who don't need to be convinced. That same week, I began mentoring a group of young women through a nonprofit focused on financial literacy for girls in underserved communities. I sat with them, just like Grandma Evelyn had sat with me, and taught them about compound interest, investing, and knowing their worth beyond what anyone else tells them. One of the girls, 14 years old and sharp as a blade, asked, "Why do you do this? You already made it." I smiled. Because someone once did it for me, and because success means nothing if you're alone at the top. The real healing didn't come from watching my family change. It came from building something stronger in their absence. A community, a marriage, a life rooted in self-respect. I stopped trying to rewrite the past and started authoring my future. And perhaps the greatest surprise was how natural it felt to finally live out loud, to speak my accomplishments, to wear what I loved, to stop dimming my light to make others more comfortable. The next Thanksgiving, Marcus and I hosted dinner at our apartment. Just a small gathering. Friends, colleagues, a couple of my mentees who couldn't travel home. We served a mix of traditional dishes and our own spin on the holiday. There was no turkey centerpiece, no tension masquerading as politeness, just warmth, laughter, and a sense of belonging that I had once thought only blood could bring. After everyone left, I sat on the couch, legs tucked under me, wine glass in hand. Marcus joined me, pressing a kiss to my temple. "You okay?" he asked. I looked around the room, the glow of string lights reflected in the window, and nodded. "Yeah, I am." I had spent so many years trying to be worthy of my family's attention, their love, their recognition, but I didn't need it anymore. I had stopped letting people decide who I was and started owning it for myself, and that was worth every dollar I ever earned. Thank you for staying with me through this journey. If this story spoke to a part of you, if you've ever felt unseen, underestimated, or asked to shrink for the sake of someone else's comfort, know this. You don't have to keep playing that role. Drop a comment and let me know how you found your voice. And if you're still searching, I promise, it's there, waiting. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Vengeance Within for more stories about finding power in the places no one expected. Sometimes, the most radical thing you can do is simply stand in your truth.